Welcome to this global chat on think tanks. The Global Go-To Think Tanks Index is an annual report published by the Think Tanks and Civil Societies program at the University of Pennsylvania. The index has become one of the most comprehensive rankings of the world's top think tanks, and we're excited that Gateway House today has featured for the first time in these rankings. We're ranked among the top think tanks in China, India, Japan, and Korea, number 29 out of 50. And the think tanks to watch, where we are number 53 out of 80. The best use of social networks, where we're 32 out of 60. And the think tanks with the best use of the internet, 38 out of 40. The report, which we will discuss shortly, highlights the role that think tanks play in government, civil societies, and policy making. We're happy over here to have with us today 4 people from different parts of the world. There's Jim McCann, who's the director of the Think Tanks and Civil Societies program at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Jim, for joining us.
My pleasure.
We have Gauri Khandekar, who's sitting at the moment in Brussels. She's the head of programs for Agora Asia, Europe for FRIDE. Welcome, Gauri.
Thank you very much.
And we have Rajiv Kumar, who's the General Manager, Learning and Development at the Tata Group Corporate Communications. Rajiv, welcome. And finally, Akshay Mathur, the Head of Research and Geoeconomics Fellow at Gateway House. Now, let's sort of straight away get into the discussion about this. And according to the Global Go-To Think Tank report published by the University of Pennsylvania, India is among the top 5 countries with the largest number of think tanks. We've got 192 over here. Jim, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the notable trends you've seen in terms of issues and challenges among the think tanks, particularly in South Asia and also in India?
I would divide them into 2, and for the first time, this year's report analyzes and identifies the major megatrends and specific trends facing think tanks around the world. So on the larger trends that I would say are presenting an almost existential challenge for think tanks is globalization and, more importantly, technological innovation and the rate of technological change will provide a fundamental challenge to all knowledge-based institutions, and most specifically to think tanks. In terms of Asia and South Asia, we have this year, I would point out, have refined the rankings within the region. So we have separated consciously India, China, Republic of South Korea, and Japan from the list, and then have focused in order to highlight and give greater space for think tanks and identification of the leading think tanks in other areas in Asia, and we've created a Central Asia category so that the areas and delineation in terms of think tanks are more clearly defined. In terms of the major around 60% of all think tanks that are currently in existence exist or in North America and Europe, Western Europe, but also Eastern and Central Europe. There's been a growing number of think tanks. The fundamental difference and major trend is around the world, the rate of establishment of think tanks has slowed. That, however, is not the case in Asia. There is a dramatic growth in the number of think tanks in Asia. I expect that to continue. Part of that is increased development, but also the complexity of the problems facing policymakers in the region, and the demand, increasing demand for independent information and analysis in countries in the region. And I would point out an extraordinary, quite dramatic growth in terms of both investment and global presence of think tanks in China. In terms of India, the while there are a significant number, 192 think tanks that we've identified in India, one of the key differentials is that, and one of the things I'd like when I come to India in late April, is to meet and dialogue with think tanks in India about the fact that relative to other countries in the region, think tanks outside of India in terms of the global fora are not as present as they might be, and I think that's important, and that the government and private sector and other sectors need to support think tanks and have them present in these fora. Additionally, the historical dimensions in terms of the university system would suggest that there would be a greater number of think tanks than there are in India, and that, I think, needs to increase the diversity of think tanks in terms of private sector, corporate, university-affiliated, political party-affiliated, etc., are not in the numbers, and so the diversity within the think tank landscape in India is not what it might be. And then in terms of critical areas and challenges facing India in terms of policy concerns, they're not as represented, those areas are not as represented. And then finally, think tanks in India have largely been relegated to technocratic advice. And so in terms of broader political policy issues and key social and economic issues, think tanks in India, in relative terms, have not had the prominence and influence that they might have. Those are the major trends. Thank you for including me in your panel today, and I really want to thank Gateway House for joining the 80 think tanks and other organizations in 60 cities and 50 countries that are participating in this program to heighten the role and importance of think tanks around the world. Thank you very much.
Jim, before you hang up, could I ask you one more question? Which
sure,
has
of course.
to do with the political issues. Could you sort of talk a bit more about what some of the political challenges or issues faced by think tanks are and what the implications are?
Well, I mean, the sort of critical issue, and it's identified in the trends that I mentioned, is the increasing political polarization. Much is talked about in terms of the partisan rancor in the United States, but the reality is, if you look at countries around the world, whether it's China, India, Germany, there is increasing political polarization, and in some respects, that's connected to the fact that there is the economic growth that has occurred has narrowed the policy choices or areas where both politicians and think tanks can have influence, and therefore, unfortunately, the polarization is a result of the lack of areas where there's resources and consensus around key policy issues that is facilitated by increased resources. So that has created a problematic for think tanks, which needs to be overcome. And the purpose of the trends that I've identified is the think tanks need to understand them, not be trapped by them, and provide solutions for the societies in which they operate.
Super. Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, clearly issues in terms of
go ahead.
The private sector and nonprofit sector, and the issue across the board in countries of developing policy solutions, not engaging in political or partisan rancoring. Increasingly, the civil society and the society writ large has a crisis of credibility with their leaders and are expecting them to come up with solutions, and think tanks are on the front line of delivering that and have an obligation to essentially come up with solutions and not be drawn into the partisan rancor that is occurring.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, Akshay, I'm going to move on to you. And it seems that some of the challenges we've talked about, awareness, political apathy, limited funding, underdeveloped capacity, are challenges which seem to be universal for think tanks across the world. What are your thoughts about that in terms of globally and also within India?
Thanks, Louis. And I think when we set up Gateway House, that was about 5 years ago, not very long ago. But the idea was that we have to convince people and the public at large, which means the civil society, the media, but also government officials and business, that there is something more to writing, thinking, conceiving, creating ideas for national interest, and not for a specific corporate interest or a special interest that we are traditionally used to, at least here in India. And getting that message across has been a challenge, and we have been doing work on that front, and we've come a long way in 5 years. So I think, particularly for India, apart from all the other challenges that you have mentioned, this has been very critical. The second thing is, because we don't understand India as well, the idea of national interest, it also then percolates down to not understanding very well what an independent think tank really means. And because people are used to newspapers, op-eds, articles, blogs now, but what does it mean to really write as an independent institution, to have a non-partisan view, to suggest a policy framework? And we have gradually started to see that is seeping in. When people ask us, what does Gateway House think? When people seek us out, we understand that it is an independent view. So those are the two things, apart from what the global challenges are, that we have particularly seen in India. And I think we made progress in changing that mindset.
That's super, and the fact that Gateway House in just 5 years is already in the rankings, I think, is something which you guys should be very happy with, and congratulations again. Gauri, from cold Brussels, we've talked about some of the challenges in India, and would like to know your thoughts how this role compares with what think tanks around the world are doing. For example, how does FRIDE define its role, and how do you work with different stakeholders?
Well, let me begin by saying that FRIDE is an independent think tank, and we do face very similar issues to what many Indian think tanks are facing. Funding is critical for think tanks, I think, and especially independent think tanks. FRIDE does not want to compromise on its ethics and its independence, but we also need support. I think there are two ways of working when it comes to think tanking internationally. You can head for the corporate funding, but then you need to sell your soul to some extent. And I really take my hat off to those who manage to not sell their souls off. America is a very different picture because they're raising money, fundraisers are quite common, and it's a cultural thing. Not so in Europe. So we're also suffering to quite a large extent. Funding in general for research across Europe has gone down, and think tanks in particular. It's quite a bad thing. It's run dry. When I started working for FRIDE, I was actually sent to India to get some funds, and when I went to India, all the Indians said, "Well, you're from Europe. They're the ones with the money." But it's not true now, as you can see. So sadly, we also are facing the same issues, and I was in Madrid this week to discuss funding issues, which are really critical. There are certain models of companies, of think tanks that work for companies that manage to get corporate funding. And it's an interesting way in which they have to project themselves, but also how can you maintain your independence. And then they turn out to be more event-focused think tanks. But think tanks like FRIDE, which really do research, and the quality of our research is so good. The ideas we put out, because we're mainly an ideas-based think tank. I think there's a distinction between that, but yeah, we do face the same issues as most think tanks do.
Thank you, Gauri. We've got this other issue, Akshay, with you've got all these ideas. People want ideas to go out over there to all stakeholders, be it the private sector, be it the government, be it the academic community. And in terms of getting these ideas across, take, for example, Gateway House, which was started to basically work with corporate India in terms of global issues. How do you garner support for work?
Yeah, Lewis, there are two things I think we have focused on in the last so many years. One is to actually carve out a space where we can provide that value to corporates and to businesses. And of course, Gateway House, we define our audience as three broad categories. One is business, second, as you rightly mentioned. The second is, of course, government or policymakers. And third is civil society. Businesses are main stakeholders because we set up in Mumbai with the idea that we should be able to translate what national interest is, what government is doing to business and vice versa. And just taking these stakeholders, if you take these three categories, we have to somewhat apply different strategies to all three different segments, even though business is the most important. So for business, we look at discussions, holding meetings at our venue here at Gateway House, as well as providing output, which introduces business elements in our business as stakeholders, business as participants, business as audience, aligning strategic interests of India, where business and government can go together. So that's how we address business. For government, we try to host discussions in Delhi and try to train diplomats and have an engagement with diplomats from around the world who come to India, so that because they want to understand India, or because we have some value to provide on how to engage with India. And last is, of course, civil society and public. Internet, as you know, our website and some of the other tools we use is one of the biggest mediums, but now we are frequently on television, on news channels, business news channels, Hindi news channels, trying to reach out with our ideas, trying to provide something that otherwise is getting lost in the news, specifically an understanding of what is happening in the world, as well as solutions frameworks, where people understand that we're also coming out with specific ideas.
Well, thanks, Akshay. And in fact, it's interesting that when you mentioned about social networks and engaging with civil society, that we've done so, Gateway House has done so well in the rankings using social networks and the internet. Rajiv, I hope you're back on.
You hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now. So, Rajiv, the question I was asking you was, the new government's got an ambitious role for India. The Planning Commission actually has been reconstituted as a think tank, Niti Aayog. So, what role can think tanks play in this with this new government in place, and how does the business community benefit from think tanks?
Right. I'll repeat what I was saying was that growth agendas can only succeed if policies are based on research evidence that is very objective, relevant, and valid. Now, it's very tempting in politics to first frame the populist political agenda and then look for arguments and research that will support the political agenda. Ideally, objective research should lead the political agenda so that the country's actual needs are met. Think tanks, therefore, must strive to be politically very neutral and keep the public and the government informed about its research findings. Credibility of think tanks is very important, and they must contribute to creating a very informed government and a very empowered society. For this, they need to be very well networked with the government and be also media savvy. The government and business have to work together in a very collaborative mode if the growth agenda has to be met. Think tanks can offer very sound ideas, very credible evidence, and platforms for framing of constructive policies and collaboration between government and business. In fact, they can prove to be the link between business, researchers, and the government. So, for any country to succeed, I think it is better that the actual needs and objectives are met, and there is alignment between what think tanks do and what research evidence is provided, and what business needs, and what the government has its objectives. So this alignment is very important.
Thanks, Rajiv. Gauri, I'm going to go back to one of the points you raised about funding being a challenge. So how does the government and the private sector, how do they empower independent, I think the focus was really on independent research institutions, which you talked about. So how does the government and the private sector empower them? How do they create the environment for think tanks to sort of survive? And what are the incentives for the private sector to support these such institutions?
So, first of all, I would like to mention that independent think tanks really can uphold interests of even the private sector. So that is something that needs to be recognized. And they can do it in a very efficient manner without being biased. The second point I want to say how they can really empower independent think tanks is by first recognizing them and identifying them. By identifying these independent think tanks, they know who really needs the support, which think tanks are basically capable of giving a non-biased advice and ideas, and then and those that they can support. Now, needs a lot of quality analysis as well. But identifying independent think tanks and those with good quality, I think, is critical. Because, of course, the ones that are ranked very high or those that are really prominent have a lot of funds, which they do get from various supporters or endowments or sponsors. But independent think tanks struggle even if they do have great quality. And the next issue I would like to raise is transparency. Here in Europe, we have the European institutions that that do have research funding, and it's a very competitive process, but it's also transparent. Everything is published online, and that is transparent, of course. Governments as well, European governments, is some funding to think tanks, and even Sweden receives funding from certain European governments, while we do underline our quality and our neutrality in our research. But direct funding, if there is a government department in the MFA, which these think tanks can really send their proposals to and get this funding, I think that would help a lot, but also have a very transparent process.
Thank you. Rajiv, I've seen you quite often at Gateway House events. Thank you for supporting us. So what are your thoughts on what incentives the private sector, what incentivizes rather the private sector to support think tanks and independent research institutions?
I think there is a lot of gain to be made by supporting think tanks. Firstly, you gain a lot of intelligence of different kinds. You gain market intelligence, you gain geopolitical intelligence, you gain business intelligence, and also the fact that the think tanks provide an opportunity to network with intelligentsia across the government and business spectrum, allowing you to explore opportunities for further and future collaboration. That is the biggest thing. And in the information economy, we basically need someone like think tanks to process all the data that is available in the environment and process it and derive intelligence out of it and supply the fuel that will actually drive both the government and the business agenda. So for this important role of creating a climate of ideas and influencing that climate, I think think tanks play a very important role, and they must be given the dignity and status as we give to universities, even though these are universities without students.
That's a very strong statement, Rajiv, and thank you. Akshay, we've talked about, Rajiv mentioned that, we need to, the role of think tanks is that, companies gain intelligence from there. We're able to sort of process data. What are the challenges think tanks have in terms of living up to this expectation? Is it difficult recruiting people because of some of the funding issues we talked about earlier? Is that a challenge? Could you tell us more about, how does one sort of live up to the ability to get the dignity of being a university?
Well, I think for the first challenge is staying true to the mission, and we have to get up every day in the morning and remind ourselves what our mission is, because there is so much noise, there's so many global developments, from terrorism to economic developments to business challenges. Our audience is demanding more of us, and that's great. But we have to keep thinking what is in the best interest of the country. So we have to stay true to that. Second, the funding is a challenge, and for the research team, that directly translates into what kind of talent we can attract. Anybody who can write on international affairs, public policy, international business, finance, is typically is in a way a high-skilled job, and everybody who works here at Gateway House can just as easily work for a corporate firm or some other organization for 4 times the money. So people come because they are driven, they are passionate, but at the same time, we have to immerse ourselves a little bit here and make this institution like a melting pot where people can bring in the different skills from an MBA or a journalist or a scientist, but they all have to think as policymakers and what to do, how you can improve, how you can suggest ideas to improve policy. And lastly, I would say is that I think in the end it does boil down to impact, and it helps to have people like Rajiv and other people who demand more of us, and they demand more of us because they are looking for actionable expertise. They are looking to make a change, and that is heartening. There are people, there may be a large section of society who does not understand what we do, but there are people who do. That's how we got funded. That's how people like Rajiv and others actually ask us that we want to make this change. Can you empower us with the ideas, and can you give us specific recommendations? So every so often we have to sharpen our area of focus and our area of and our format of writing. And hopefully that we can do as we continue to build Gateway House going forward.
Okay, we've got time for just one question each. I'm going to pass it, and I'm going to start off with you, Gauri. First of all, congratulations to FRIDE also for featuring in the UPenn rankings. Gauri, would like some of your thoughts on think tanks collaborating, working together, and this in a way, therefore, getting around some of the funding issues and being able to share resources. What's been your experience?
Yeah. So, first of all, let me tell you 2 lines about my own program, the program that I had and I created. We have 19 think tank partners in my Asia program. These partners are based around the Asia Pacific. And I think this is the way forward. For most organizations, collaborate in terms of research because it enhances the quality of your output. And as Akshay mentioned, in terms of funding, of course, we do we partner with these organizations because it also empowers our position, it strengthens our position, and the quality of output that we're able to deliver in terms of projects. So we do partner with these organizations on funds. The European institutions, whenever they have this kind of projects out, it is not limited to just European think tanks. So, and it's seen as an added plus to really have international partners. So in that sense, I can only say that I have a very positive experience, and I really look forward to perhaps partnering one day with Gateway House.
Thank you. Thank you, Gauri. And Rajiv, I'm not sure whether you sort of work associated with other think tanks, but would like to sort of know, you've talked about what the expectation is, that it's supposed to play a role to gain intelligence for the business community. Do you think that think tanks today in India are doing that, or are getting closer to that objective, or are far away?
I don't think right now the objectives are being met by the think tanks in terms of what the needs of the business community are in a very organized way. And this process needs to be made more systematic and scientific. And as I said earlier, there's got to be alignment between government and the business and the think tanks. And we need to identify common objectives, research objectives that will facilitate policy making, that will facilitate certain actions to be taken to fulfill any growth agenda. And that alignment actually is not structured, or it is lacking in some ways, which can be improved with greater collaboration. We talk of numbers of think tanks spoken of in the earlier part of the discussion. I don't think numbers are so important as much as the quality. One of the issues which always disturb the credibility of think tanks is how valid are the research and what is the quality of the research? Who is actually measuring the quality? Are we to accept at face value whatever output the think tank produces, or is there a validation system? So that, but you need to get better researchers, you need to get better quality research, you need to find ways of validating your own research and proving it so that there is greater confidence and greater confidence in the neutrality and the credibility of the think tank.
Thanks, Rajiv. Okay, Akshay, you guys are on a high. You've come onto the rankings for the first time. You got 10 minutes to wrap up. Starting now. 10 seconds, rather.
Well, first of all, Lewis, I want to thank. I want to begin by thanking you because you are one of the people who pushed us and constantly asked us the hard questions. And I think we always need that. We Leading to the rankings, like all rankings, is always heartening. We want to work hard, and I hope that there is a way for us to understand the rankings better because we want to make sure that we are meeting the objectives that we set out to do. And I think one can only say that if we can continue with the mission and we can see some impact, gauging impact in this field is very hard. But I'm sure with some supporters like Rajiv and our other members and our funders and other bureaucrats and diplomats and everybody else who uses us, if they give us feedback, I think we will know that we are making a change. And I think that's what we're here for.
Thanks a lot, Akshay. So thanks, Jim. Thanks, Gauri. Thanks, Rajiv. And Akshay for joining us today.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you.